This video is brought to you by Ground News. It seems that the Ukraine war may finally be in its endgame. Last Wednesday, the US president announced that he'd spoken directly to Vladimir Putin. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced that Trump was the perfect dealmaker at the table, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that he was open to ceasefire talks. More importantly, though, it seems that the US is keen to end the war with as little involvement as possible. Trump himself told the Europeans that they would be responsible for guaranteeing Ukraine's security after the war, causing Zelensky to claim that there needs to be an army of Europe, and EU Council President Antonio Costa to claim that there needs to be a new security architecture in Europe. The question here in the UK, though, is exactly what role will Britain take in this architecture? It seems that, for his part, Prime Minister Keir Starmer believes that the British army could be deployed in Ukraine to maintain the peace. But exactly what would they be doing there? How would this work? And what more does the UK need to do in order to keep the peace in Ukraine?
If you want more UK political drama from us, check out our podcast Starmageddon, where we track the successes and failures of this new Labour government. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast's YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app.
Now we're going to split this video into 3 parts. In the first, we're going to have a look at Starmer's plan to deploy troops in Ukraine. In the second, we're going to have a look at how Starmer could take a leading role in the new European security architecture. And in the third, we're going to have a look at how all of this will impact him domestically. On Sunday, specifically in response to the latest developments in Ukraine, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer wrote a piece in the Telegraph, arguing that, in order to secure a lasting peace in Ukraine, Britain should be prepared to put our own troops on the ground if necessary. He added that he feels deeply the responsibility that comes with potentially putting British servicemen and women in harm's way, but that any role in helping to guarantee Ukraine's security is helping to guarantee the security of our continent and the security of this country. So, why does he think this? Essentially, it's all about exactly how fragile the purported peace deal could end up being. As we mentioned in the introduction, it seems that neither Trump nor Hegseth seem that keen on America being involved past the peace deal. More significantly, though, they also don't appear that keen on including Europe in the peace negotiations. This seems to be worrying Europe somewhat, as it's quite clear that they are the ones who will have to pick up the slack from the US. There is a fear that Russia could soon start to get ideas, especially after it has had time to build up during the period of peace. It's worth noting here that, despite the war in Ukraine, Russia's ability to strike at enormous distances remains, and its fleet of long-range bombers and missile carriers remain largely unscathed. Putting troops in Ukraine serves multiple purposes, all designed to prevent this possibility. First, it's simply a show of European unity and a demonstration that Ukraine doesn't stand on its own. Second, it's a way of showing Russia that Europe can stand against them if they think of taking on another European country, for example Poland. And third, it's a way to prevent Russia from easily restarting the war and taking control of more Ukrainian territory. So it's clear what Starmer's logic is for putting troops in Ukraine, but what could this actually look like? Well, it's important to note here that what Starmer is proposing is not a peacekeeping force, but rather a reassurance force. The key difference here is that the latter will not be stationed on the eventual ceasefire line, but behind it. Speaking more about this possible troop deployment, the Telegraph points out that the deployment could be around 40 to 50,000 strong and come from a coalition of Northern European NATO nations. This could include the UK, alongside other European countries with strong militaries. In fact, France is the one country that seems the most allied with Starmer on his troop suggestion, with Macron proposing a troop deployment in Ukraine more than a year ago. The difficulty will be convincing other nations to take part. As things stand, Germany and Poland have ruled this out, with the latter suggesting that it's committed to protecting NATO's eastern flank. So Starmer might be committed to the idea, but it's a long way off being implemented. Now let's move on to the second part of this video, and have a look more broadly at what else Britain could do in order to counter Russia. The second big thing that Starmer called for in the Telegraph article is for Europe to increase its defence spending. Indeed, this is something that the US president has also been calling for some time, and actually meeting the 2.5% target, alongside other nations, would act as a deterrent to Putin during the peace period. As things stand, the Labour government already committed to increasing British defence spending in their manifesto last year, promising to bump it up to 2.5%. There are a couple of caveats here though. First, they didn't set a deadline for this promise, simply saying that they'd launch a strategic defence review within their first year in office, and this has yet to be published. As such, the UK is currently sitting at only 2.3%. Increasing defence spending, given the current fiscal situation, is certainly not going to be easy. And second, part of the problem, as raised by Stephen Bush writing for the FT, is not so much reaching this target, but it's exactly how you spend the money to get there. The UK is one of a handful of nations that has nuclear weapons, and maintaining these accounts for a large portion of our defence spending. Analysis from early last year shows that if we exclude nuclear weapons, UK defence spending is actually only about 1.75% of GDP, significantly below target. The key here will be to actually invest in our conventional forces. As we explained in a video last year, which is linked in the description below, the British Army is in something of a tricky spot, with it suffering a recruitment crisis, faulty equipment, and an unaffordable defence equipment plan. The point we're making is, it's easy to say that the UK military needs more funding to deter Russia, but this will be a lot harder to achieve in reality. And this brings us nicely onto the third part of our video, what this all means for Starmer domestically. Overall, it seems that this could all help Starmer. It's fair to say that so far, Starmer's plans, whether that be means testing the winter fuel allowance or introducing inheritance tax on farmers, haven't been all that popular with the public. Initial polling suggests that both of his proposals actually seem to be relatively popular with the public. 58% of respondents say that they support British troops being stationed as peacekeepers, and 40% say the UK is spending too little on defence. Whether this support remains when the public finds out the cost of doing so, though, is entirely another question. Actually keeping up with this, though, is pretty hard at the moment. We're increasingly being flooded by misleading content, algorithmic feeds that just back up our biases and reductions in fact-checking efforts. It almost feels like people are intentionally making it harder to get to the truth. One way you can cut through that noise is with Ground News, a website and app on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. Every day, Ground News ingests over 50,000 articles from all over the world. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organisations. For example, here's a story about Starmer's troop deployment plan. Right away, you can see that the story had at least 217 outlets reporting on it. 38% lean left, while 36% lean right. Every story also comes with a detailed view of the bias distribution, factuality scores, and even specific ownership information, so that you can see how reliable the reporting actually is. You can also swipe through some of the headlines to get a more detailed understanding of how reporting might change based on political bias. But my favourite part has to be their blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are being underreported on one side of the political spectrum or the other. This not only helps you redress your personal news bias by reading stories you might otherwise have missed, but it also gives you a better perspective of how the media ecosystem is being manipulated and shifted to fit political objectives. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, cutting through the opinion and the noise with a feed free from manipulation or algorithms, and I can't recommend it enough. In fact, if you subscribe today, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan. That's under $6 a month for unlimited access to every incredible Ground News feature. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.